What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the daily live puzzle solving series. I'm your host, Quinn, and today we're going to be tackling a puzzle that's rated just above 2000 on chess.com. So, today we're going to work on a concept called updating the probabilities as evidence comes in. So, it's based on an idea called Bayesian statistics. And so, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this idea, it's basically the notion that we're going to establish an initial set of probabilities for what we think the outcome of the puzzle will be. So it could be a checkmate, it could be winning material. And then we're going to update the probability that we think these things are going to happen as we get evidence on the position from our calculations. So to take you through an example of that, let's just take a look at this position. It's pretty even in material. In fact, we both have two rooks, we both have a bishop, and we both have four pawns. And in terms of king safety, his king is pretty safe. It's sheltered behind three pawns here. We don't have too much material to attack him with, even though we have pieces that are taking away escape squares of the king. It doesn't look like we have any checks even that we can give in this position. So I'd give his king safety a 6 out of 10. Our king safety, I would say, is a 5 out of 10. It's our king is a little bit more out in the open, but there's not too much danger that can come of it. We're probably not going to get checkmated anytime soon. Piece activity-wise, I would say our rooks are very, very active here. His rooks, especially this one on f1, is less active. And his bishop is also kind of caught further away in the corner, whereas our bishop is doing a lot more work here down this open diagonal. So I would give our piece activity a 7 out of 10, and I would give him a 4 out of 10 in piece activity. So once we've done that initial assessment, I can say that probably winning material in this position is the most likely outcome. I would say there is a 90 to 95% chance that the position is somewhat going to be winning material. On the other hand, giving a checkmate, I would say, is very, very low probability. At most, 5% chance. I would even venture to say there's probably a 0% chance, but you never know with calculation what we might dig up. And then some other outcome like creating a passed pawn or threatening some sort of attack that we can convert to like a space advantage or something like that. I would say that has maybe another 5% probability. So we established those as the initial probabilities, and now we're going to look at the candidate moves, and we'll see if calculation can lead to us changing the likelihood that we think those things are going to happen. And if we do change the likelihood, we're going to change our focus to try to look for that particular outcome happening. So we're going to allow our prioritization of candidate moves to be guided by what we think is most likely to happen. Now, if we look at the specific pieces where we can target to win material, it looks like this bishop on h7 is undefended. This rook on f1 is also kind of trapped here between his king and his other rook, so it could also be vulnerable. So I would say there is a 40% chance that we can win this bishop. There's a 40% chance that we can win this rook. And then this rook here, maybe a 20% chance. Now, if we're looking at candidate moves, in order to take advantage of this rook being trapped, immediately I can see a move like bishop to b5 jumping out. I looked at this position for about a minute or two before I started recording, and that move had already occurred to me in that time. It wasn't the most obvious move in the beginning. I was initially looking at potentially attacking him down the second rank here, but I decided that that's a move that we can consider, but maybe not the highest probability to maybe win a pawn here or something like that. But unless we can see with our calculations that it's unlikely to be one of these pieces that we can win, we're not going to focus on targeting these pawns, and that's staying loyal to our initial probability assessments. So bishop to b5, we can calculate this a little bit. So does he have a move that can clear his rook or his king with a tempo so that he can move his rook out of danger? Rook e8 check, that loses to bishop takes e8. So that's not an option. If he tries to block with the rook, obviously we can just take it for free. If he moves his king out of the way, we can just take the rook. So those all look pretty good to me so far. And our rooks here are on dark squares, so there's no threats that he can create with his bishop. And our king is also in a dark square. So I don't see any Zwischenzugs with his bishop coming into light. If he tries to block with the bishop, here on d3, we can just take his bishop and we're still winning that rook on f1. So bishop b5 is a very strong candidate move to start with. Another candidate move that we can consider is a move like f5, maybe trying to trap this bishop by limiting its mobility. And we have this f5 square covered by our rook on c5. After f5, we could, if he were to skip his turn, we could maybe play a move like rook d7 to attack the bishop. The problem is he has too many squares that he can go with the bishop. He can go to g6, he can go to g8, and then if he goes to g8, because we moved the pawn from f7 to f5, he now has this long diagonal here that he can move his bishop to. So f5 to trap the bishop doesn't look like a highly plausible idea. And another candidate move that we could consider is maybe just trying to double up the rooks on the second rank. But again, this pawn here is very secure. It's got two defenders, and we can't add a third attacker to it. So it seems very unlikely that we can win this pawn, as we had already established in our initial assessment. So after this initial wave of calculation, I think we can adjust the probabilities a little bit. I would say that this rook, winning this rook, is probably closer to 70%, let's say. I can downgrade the probability of winning this bishop to like 20%. And then maybe there's a 10% chance that we can win this rook on e1. So with that in mind, let's really focus on winning this rook and going with this candidate move of bishop to b5. And let's see what he responds with after this move. Okay, so that is a correct first move. So he does move his rook out of the way in a way that does threaten one of our pieces. He's threatening to capture here on c5. So that's actually a very good move that we did not consider in our initial assessment. That probably should have occurred to us. So we'll definitely reflect on that and try to improve our calculation. And so now the problem is, if we take the rook on f1, he can take our rook on c5, and that on the surface looks like an even trade. But maybe we have a follow-up move like rook to d1 with the idea that now we're threatening to checkmate him with a discovered check, bishop to h3, where his king is cut off from going to the second rank because of our bishop's effect on this g2 square. Let's see if he has anything to get out of that. So his rook can not contend our rook on d1. He can't move it back to the first rank. We would just take it. He can't challenge us here on d5 either. We can just take his rook once again, and being down a full rook here would probably be a completely crippling disadvantage. So again, we're looking at this line where we move our rook to d1 and threaten this checkmate. He can maybe move his bishop to c2 to threaten our rook, so that we would have to move the rook. We can maybe move the rook to c1 after that and pin his bishop to the rook, and then also still threaten that checkmate. And he doesn't have any discovered checks with the bishop because our king is on a dark square. I actually like to call that a check discovery, where you check with the piece that's moving out of the way. So rook c1 looks like a good move. It looks like even rook a1 or maybe even rook e1 could also work to just dodge the attack of the bishop. Trying to look deeper into those lines to see if there's anything that he can do to prevent that. His rook is on c5 once again. And after bishop to c2, he can't move his rook back to the first rank to cover these checking ideas. Bishop to d3 doesn't really do anything. We can take it with a discovered check, or we can just go bishop h3 for checkmate. That looks even better. So bishop takes f1 looks like a very strong candidate move in this third ply position here. Another candidate move that we can consider is rook takes c1. But after rook takes c1, it looks like we're out of ideas in terms of winning material. We can't attack this rook anymore with our bishop because it's on a dark square. He can simply consolidate his forces. The bishop on h7, as we had earlier assigned probabilities, is a very low probability of winning that bishop. So with this second round of evidence in mind, I would say that winning this rook is probably at like a 90 to 95% chance. Now, checkmate is still very low, like 0% chance, unless he decides to take this rook, in which case checkmate suddenly becomes much more likely. And then winning this bishop is now down to maybe like a 10% chance. And winning this rook still looks like a pretty low probability. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and commit to this candidate move of bishop takes f1. But let's just be extra careful here and check for anything else that we could possibly do. I mean, maybe we can double up rooks on the c file. He would just take, and then if we take back, he can move his rook out of danger of the bishop, and then we can't threaten anymore. We can double up the rooks this way. He could also just take, and then move his rook out of the way. So none of these variations work. They're just too slow in this position. So let's go ahead and commit to this move. Bishop takes f1. Okay, so he does take on c5, and now material's still even, but I think now we can play rook to d1 here and threaten this checkmate. So now the priority has changed because he committed to rook takes c5. And I would say checkmate now looks a lot more likely. And it doesn't look very likely that we can win further material. This rook is all the way out in the open. He has plenty of squares to go to. There's no way we can trap this rook anymore. This bishop also very, very open and mobile. So the prospect of giving a checkmate, I would say, has suddenly jumped to maybe like 80 to 90%. So we should be very focused on looking at that and examining that as a probability. So in order to really advance our position where we can potentially deliver a checkmate, we have to put our rook in line with his king so that we can deliver a check. By definition, to be a checkmate, it has to be a check. So can he do anything to stop that? As we mentioned, bishop c2 can attack the rook, but we can just move the rook to c1 or e1. I highly suspect that rook d1 would be the last move in the puzzle because of those options that we have. And it doesn't look like he can stop it with rook d5 or rook c1 either, for the reasons that we had mentioned earlier. You can just take the rook. So let's go ahead and commit to this move, rook to d1. And okay, so he can go f2. Right. That clears a space here. And now it looks like bishop to d3 check is the correct move. Now all of a sudden it looks like checkmate is no longer plausible because he's cleared a square for his king. But winning this bishop that's undefended on h7, I would say, is now a very, very likely outcome. So I would say that's like a 90% chance now. It looks like checkmate has fallen down to 10% or even 0% chance. So we should be highly focused on winning this bishop. And this rook here is on a dark square, so it can't be won with a discovered check with our bishop. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and commit to this as the move. And he moves his king, and then we just take the bishop, and that should be the end of the puzzle. Okay, so main takeaways from the puzzle is it seems like the updating of probabilities at each move helps us with finding candidate moves that are specifically tailored to that position. Our calculation did have a couple of holes in it. We didn't anticipate f2 to f4 here. And also back here, we didn't anticipate rook e1 to c1. So we do need to look for forcing moves or look for ways to get out of a threat on our opponent's side. We need to be better at finding those in the calculation sequence. But we were able to catch on to the main ideas. And after solving this puzzle, I actually don't really need to even check the computer analysis because everything was kind of clear along the way. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. We'll try to continue with these themes going into future videos, try to review them and continue on our chess improvement journey. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button if you enjoyed. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.